talking to somebody else someone who has the same tic is pretty wild. That's pretty fun to like hear someone say they do that thing which you thought was just so weird and like strange where you're doing it, and there's no one else on the planet who possibly does that too.
Hey everybody, it's Ben, and welcome to the season finale of the Tourette's podcast. Now, what does that mean? A lot, actually, and it's all good. It means that, for one, I'll be developing season 2 quite soon, doing a new batch of interviews with fellow Touretters. I'll be in touch with you about that, but closing out a season, the first season, a full season of this podcast, means that I'm blown away by how far we've made it. I've said before that I was making no assumptions about this podcast when it launched. I didn't know how many listeners would be into it. Would I even get enough people wanting to talk to a total stranger about Tourette Syndrome? And, really open up about their lives with it. Well, a lot of amazing people stepped up and trusted me when they had no reason to. Again, a total stranger who says he has Tourette's wants to talk with you. I mean, that's basically how I came off. But what I found was a really brilliant, wonderful crowd of people, some of whom were totally out and open about their tics, and a lot of people who, like me, had lived a life in hiding when it came to Tourette's. People who just never talked about it to any wide open degree at all until this podcast came around. And that helped me to be able to really embrace my tics and everything else that comes with Tourette's, because it's a pretty dynamic thing to have. But I'm not living outside of the community anymore, and I'm not in hiding about my tics anymore. Having these conversations on this podcast made me totally, for the first time ever, at least since I was a kid, not only comfortable, but actually proud to say to my coworkers and acquaintances and really anybody, proud to say that I have Tourette syndrome, and I'm fine answering any and all questions you have about it. And since then, that was earlier this year, no one's treated me differently. No one's jabbed at me with any dumb jokes. I know that's not a universal experience for people with Tourette's. There's a lot of unfair treatment out there. And, because of the world's perception of Tourette's, I was always scared of being set back or rejected or isolated, when I was really kind of in one way doing that to myself on my own, just being in the Twitch closet. And that's not the case anymore. And I have everyone here to thank for it. People I interviewed early on, like, Christine Belanger and Melissa C. Water, Chris Clem, of course, can't forget Maddie from episode 1, Jonah, Vea, Pat, Brittany, Chris, Jason, Dave, Jake, Rosetta. Go back and listen to their episodes if you haven't heard them. tourettespodcast.libsyn.com. Thank you so much, sincerely. And you might ask, well, why are you closing out season 1 of the podcast during Tourette Awareness Month? Well, yeah, it's Tourette Awareness Month, May 15th through June 15th. And it's an amazing time to share these episodes. Share a note about your favorite moment on one of these episodes on Facebook or Twitter. Just tell people about it. Maybe point to these conversations as a way for people to get to know what Tourette syndrome is without the over-dramatization, but with all the authenticity that helps the public appreciate any subject. Tourette Awareness Month is, for me, the perfect time to just look back on all of this and how it's helped me as a Touretteer who couldn't have opened up about it without the help of the community I found through this podcast. Thank you to everybody who's reached out. I want to give a huge shout out to 10-year-old David. Long overdue. I totally forgot to give you a shout out a while back, I think, and I'm so sorry for that. You have amazing parents. You're very fortunate. Never forget that. So back to Awareness Month. I wholeheartedly encourage you to visit tourette.org/awareness month and see what else you can do to support the community and the research and the resources that help so many people and to help the public understand. Tourette.org/awareness month. Okay, I'll have more details about what's ahead for this podcast after we do the interview. On this episode, we've got Tim, who I really love talking to. And actually, for the first handful of minutes, we just talk about what he does for a living. I thought it was cool. He's worked in the TV industry, working on shows. He's done a lot of work in the topic of history as well, especially obscure history. He's written articles in that realm for a website called Ozzy, O-Z-Y. And he writes about sports, especially mixed martial arts, actually writing for a site called Bloody Elbow. But the common factor running through all of this, is his creativity and his drive to dig in and make things for the topics that he's interested in, which I totally relate to. and Tourette syndrome has definitely threaded through all of that as well. A standout here is, well, you know how in past episodes we've talked about visualizations that come along with tics? Like you have a tic and then you picture something in your mind that corresponds with it? A lot of you really related to that when we first talked about it several episodes ago. Well, this conversation is where it started for me. Talking to Tim was the first time I ever considered that other people besides me had visual components to their tics. Don't know why I never thought about that in the past, but then again, there's a lot of stuff that I just thought was my exclusive thing. You know, things I just never thought to even connect with Tourette syndrome. But here we all are, with all of these things in common. All of the quirks. You know, it's just more reinforcement for the thing we say here, that Tourette's is more, much more than just tics. To quote Chris from episode 2, Tourette's is a world. Let's talk to Tim. This interview was recorded back in February. Yeah, so I'm good to go whenever you are.
Okay, yeah, I'm ready. Ready as I'll ever be.
So, state your name, the part of the world that you live in, and what you do.
Okay, my name is Tim Bissell. I live in Toronto, in Canada, and I'm a television professional and somewhat of a journalist.
As far as your background in TV, kind of what led you there?
I grew up in England, and in my teens, my family, we decided to move to Canada, where we already had family. So at like 18, we were looking at our immigration kind of stuff, and it kind of helped if I would get into a college as far as processing our move. So I looked at the city we were going to move to, which is a city called Hamilton, Ontario. Mm-hmm. And there was a college there called Mohawk College, really close to my aunt and uncle's place, where I would be staying for the first year or so living here. And I just looked down their program list, and they had one called TV Broadcasting and Communications Media. And it kind of clicked to me, being like, yeah, I watch a lot of TV. I kind of like to do that. But I've always been like a creative person, wanted to work in like storytelling, and it just felt like that was the right path to take. So I got into the program, and we made our move. And my first day of college, I think it was like 3 days after like setting foot in Canada for the first time as a landed immigrant. And I just did that program and came out of it and did a lot of free work and a lot of favors in the Canadian TV industry before getting somewhat established, working on documentaries, the kind of things you'd see on Discovery or History, National Geographic, that kind of thing.
So is that kind of did you want to go in the nonfiction direction, or were you kind of thinking about, I mean, you mentioned, being a fan of TV. Did you want to go into like fiction or drama or anything like that?
I've always enjoyed that stuff, but as a kid, I was just such a huge like history nerd and a huge like nature nerd, like anything to do with animals or dinosaurs or the Roman Empire or pirates or whatever it was would just fascinate me. And that's really what I spent my time as a pretty lonely kid, just reading books and watching TV shows about these things, which I thought were really cool. And if I'd been more studious, I probably would have gone to school for something along the lines of like being a historian or an archaeologist. But I kind of took the fork in the road to either go that way, and I decided to go more of a storytelling route with hopes that I would be able to work on shows and kind of vicariously be an archaeologist by working on history shows where we follow a real archaeologist who actually went to school for 6 years and learn how to do that stuff for real.
I mean, are you allowed to talk about any titles that you worked on or anything that people might have seen?
Yeah. Well, people may not have seen much of the stuff I've worked on. A lot of it it's documentaries and documentary series produced for Canadian TV, even though they air in the States and they air in the UK. But last year, I worked on a documentary for Discovery Canada and National Geographic International. It's called Drain Alcatraz, which is one where we use CG and we take out all the water and we show San Francisco Bay with no water in whatsoever, and we tell various history and geological stories and try to explain why that prism is so hard to get out of based on the geology and the formation of the bay itself. And I worked on something called Secret of the Pyramids for our national broadcaster here at CBC, which is all about a logbook, the oldest piece of papyrus ever discovered, which has, for the first time, some details about how the Great Pyramid of Khufu, the biggest one in Giza, was built. So documentary.
That's awesome.
Yeah, all about how they loaded the huge blocks in their boats and transported them up the Nile and things like that.
Is there a simple way of explaining how that did happen?
A lot of effort.
Yeah, fair enough. We were talking off mic earlier, and you had left the TV industry. So you're doing does that kind of translate over to what you're doing now?
Yeah, well, I got into TV because the thing I wanted to be the most was a writer, and I was just finding career progression wasn't flowing that nicely in the TV world. It was very hard to get above a certain level, especially in Canada where our industry is quite small.
Mm-hmm.
And I had an experience working on a show a couple of years ago, which I hated. And I can say it because that company's gone out of business now. It was a real estate show called Humble Home Hunters. And I worked as a story editor and story producer on this little half-an-hour show for HGTV about people trying to find houses for like $100,000 Canadian.
Mm-hmm.
And I hated it. It was a really... it was a really boring show to work on, and seeing how the sausage is made in those kind of shows was quite alarming too. And while I was working on that, I just had this realization, and I can't remember we were married at the time, but if not, my fiance was just kind of like, "Wow, you really hate this," kind of thing. So it was clear just in how much I was complaining to her about things that this was really not my favorite thing in the world to do. So I just thought, like, what do I want to do is be a writer.
Right.
And instead of trying to convince people in this TV world to give me that job or to make, like, spend a lot of money making something I want to write, I was reading articles online, reading history articles and sports articles, and thinking, if I do this, I can have an idea, I can write it, and it can be on the internet in 24 hours. And I can just be actually writing things and producing things and doing what I wanted to do. So I kind of started doing that while working in TV. And I sold my first couple of articles to a website called Aussie.
Mm-hmm.
They were history articles about, very obscure, wild history tales. The first article I wrote for them was a World War II story, all about the brother of Hermann Goering, one of Hitler's right-hand men. But his brother was actually a man who was kind of an anti-Nazi who helped save Jews and get them out of, I believe it was Czechoslovakia at the time. And that was my first article, this history stories which people don't know about already, and just I like uncovering those stories and putting them out there. And I started doing that and getting more success doing it. And then I also started writing about sports. I had a favorite sports blog which I like to go to, and I was reading it, and then I eventually messaged them and said, I should write stuff for you. And I pitched them, and now that's basically my primary job as a staff writer for that one site.
That's cool. So going back to your childhood, you had mentioned just kind of spending time alone. I mean, if you don't mind my asking, what was that dynamic?
Well, I was just I still am a very introverted person. And I just always felt very shy when I was young and tried school. I didn't really make a lot of friends, and I just always enjoyed time on my own more so than being in groups, and even more so than with people who I consider were my friends back then. I was just very happy being on my own and working on something creative. And I guess I just still kind of like that today. I'm much better now. I'm much more social than I used to be. Yeah. But I'm still not the life of the party or anything like that.
Well, so, I mean, when was your diagnosis?
My diagnosis came very late in life. I want to say I was 20.
Okay.
Like, my self-diagnosis would have happened in the same year purely because, well, I've been having tics since I can really remember, I think, or at least since puberty. Yeah. But I've never considered it to be anything like other than just like I do that. I didn't think it was part of a syndrome, or I didn't associate it with Tourette's. What I saw of Tourette's on Maury Povich and stuff like that.
But so did those tics kind of play into kind of how you felt about social behavior when you were a kid?
Not when I was a little kid, I don't think. When I got older, when I became cognizant that I was doing things which not everyone else was doing,
yeah,
I think I went through a little bit more. But I would say just my general introverted like disposition was more so there than the actual tics themselves.
Gotcha. So do you remember what your early tics were, and the first things you noticed, and how parents and people around you reacted?
Well, the first one I noticed, or rather was pointed out to me, was like straining my eyes, like almost as if I'm trying to look up inside my head kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I remember my parents would see that and just be like, stop doing that. And they would think I'm doing it on purpose or something, or I'm just like making funny faces or something like that.
Right, yeah.
So that was my first one, and I still have that one to this day. But after that, I would say that my numero uno revealed itself, which is sniffing. And that's the one I'll do, like every day, maybe, I don't know, 100 times a day, maybe.
Yeah,
something like that. It's that, and it's clearing my throat and a few things which are invisible to other people, like tensing, like I don't even know what to call it, like my diaphragm or my stomach muscles, just like tensing them in a certain way.
I do that too. Yeah.
Yeah, or like the muscle, which is kind of around your armpit and shoulder, just kind of like just tensing it and making it tight.
Yeah, I do that too. Yeah.
Yeah. And those are kind of the strangest ones, because those ones to me it's almost like I'm trying to replicate like a perfect version of it each time. Like I'm trying to really knock it out of the park.
Yeah.
And get a really good one. And if you don't, it's kind of really unsatisfying. And sometimes it's like you would do like a bunch in a row, just trying to find that, like that angle or that feeling or that certain kind of,
yeah,
satisfaction from getting it done, as if like, okay, I've done it now. I can relax. It's kind of, I did the good one for today or for this hour or whatever, and moving on.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. And that's exactly how I do it too. And it's funny because there are tics that I guess, somewhere in my mind, I know I do. I'm cognizant of in one way or another, but maybe not at the front of my mind. And that's one of them, that sort of shoulder armpit straining one, because that's something I do it the exact same way. I don't think about that one as much. Like that one doesn't register as high with me as my daily tics, but I know I do it. And it's the same thing. I'll keep doing it until it feels exactly right. And then my mind is off of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, we were talking off mic about, unusual tics and how I had talked with other people who have identical tics to me that I thought nobody else had. And maybe that's just because I don't talk enough to other people who have Tourette's until now. But with some of these being invisible and you can kind of camouflage the throat clearing and the sniffing, has that kind of helped you dictate whether or not you tell people, or how you've, if you're out of the Tourette's or Twitch closet, or however you want to put it?
Well, it's allowed me to basically never have to tell anyone unless I absolutely have to. Like, the amount of people who've told me, like asked if I have a sinus problem, do I have allergies, do you need a tissue, do you have a cold, like constantly, like all the time. And, and I'm ashamed to admit that most of the time I'm like, yeah, allergies kind of thing. But I actually lie. I lie to cover up a tic, which is really weird.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I remember one of the most horrible
I do the same thing,
experiences I ever had with my sniffing tic. I remember in England, I was at a pub, like I must have been like 18 or something, which is legal in England. And I was just with some friends, and I was just, I guess, doing my normal thing. And like an older kid from school, like saw me, and he was kind of like sniffing himself and looking at me, like winking at me. And I think he was basically asking me if I was doing
Oh, yeah.
because I was sniffing. And I barely even drink alcohol.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
I've gone through long stretches of my life being almost straight edge. So just to have that association, yeah, it was really kind of scary. And it kind of, I would think at that age, it may have put me like further in the closet kind of thing. And it made me even a little more worried about, like, even though I have an explanation for why I'm doing it, like I'm not snorting coke in the bathroom. I have Tourette syndrome. I still wasn't able to bring myself to explain it away.
Yeah. You said that's kind of your standard unless you have to tell somebody. What are the situations where you feel like you have to tell?
Well, in television, I would go on TV shoots and things, and if I was very comfortable with who I was working with, I would tell people, like, I know we're rolling, but, you know, I have tics. I have involuntary tics. I may be making noise. So if you're picking me up on the mic, you just got to nudge me and tell me, you know, you can hear me, and I'll stop. But that happens few and far between. Sometimes I'll just avoid the situation altogether because I know I'll have to make that explanation at some point. But as I've gotten older, and like the last couple of years, I've been much better about it. Like I've been doing some video shoots lately for the website I work for, working with a guy, a friend, and it was pretty comfortable telling him, you know, it was just me and him on the shoot. I just told him I have Tourette's, which means in this context, you may hear me sniffing. So if you hear me in the headphones, just give me a nudge and I can focus and not do it for as long as I'm concentrating, and we're good. And he was great about it. And also, I do a lot of interviews. I interview a lot of athletes, and I record my interviews. Yeah. And when I listen back, I'm like, oh my God, I am sniffing every 10 seconds. But they never pick it up. Like, I think I've got it down so I'm kind of almost subconsciously like tilting the phone away when I do a sniff or something like that.
Right.
And, but listening back, you hear it, and it's quite shocking sometimes realizing how often you tic. And with some of our interviews, we try and make videos out of them using the audio. So I had to explain to our animator, saying, you know, you hear me sniffing all the time on this audio clip. So this is what that is, and you know, if you can cut around it, great. But sorry that I've stepped on so much of a dialogue by sniffing and clearing my throat. And he was very sweet about it too. So I think the lesson is that most often people are pretty good about it. We kind of, I kind of work myself up into a fit when it's never been that bad when I've told people what my tics are.
Just hearing that is really reassuring. And the more I talk to people, because it's the same thing, what you just said, I kind of work myself into this, you know, I talk myself out of it because of the what if, and, you know, what if this totally changes how this person is going to view me or look at me. And it's funny because I'm not really worried about that in other aspects of my life, you know, like maybe how I look or dress. I mean, maybe a little bit of that, but I mean, other aspects of my life where I just, you know, where I'm just exercising my free will. I have my tastes and my interests, and if people can't hang with it, that's, you know, that's not my fault. But for some reason, when it comes to Tourette's, I just have this fear that I'm just going to get, you know, kind of I'm going to isolate myself, and it's probably not the case. Even though I'm pretty sure, you know, it's probably the most immature of people who aren't going to get it and who are going to heap on the ridicule. I mean, that is your experience, though, when you do feel like you are in a comfortable enough position, or at least a position where you feel like you have to divulge it to somebody, that they're cool with it?
Yeah, like the vast majority of my experiences of doing that has been, the reaction is like, okay, cool. I had no idea.
Right.
And which is always kind of funny, because maybe that's why I've been able to get away with not telling people for so long, because especially when I'm in a group of people, it would take someone like really focusing on me to be able to notice that I'm doing something involuntary, especially when I've gotten good at subconsciously covering things up. Like I'll turn away when I need to roll my eyes, or you know, clear my throat, just looks normal, and sniffing, I can look over my shoulder and do it, kind of thing. Yeah, for the most part, people are like, okay, cool. Yeah, I had no idea.
Well, does that bring on follow-up questions, or do they have questions for you about your tics? And wait a minute, I thought Tourette's was XYZ.
No, I've never had a follow-up question. I think maybe people are worried that it's going to be more shocking than it is, and that they can't handle how uncomfortable that might be.
Yeah.
The only people I've really talked about it at length with are like my wife, and before her, my ex-girlfriend, who was the one who I kind of like self-diagnosed with because she was gearing up to go into university for psychology and medicine and things like that. And it's with her where I just said, like, you know what, I think I have Tourette's. And she kind of jumped on it, got all excited, and like, yeah, you totally do. I recognize that. And we went to some neurologists and stuff just to kind of, explore the experience of having it. But yeah, no one else seems that interested.
With, I mean, that was sort of one of my questions too, that I kind of had on the burner is about relationships and when it first comes up. So with your wife, do you remember what the sort of initial conversations were? I mean, did you kind of bring it up, or did she just notice something about you, or you in turn explained, or?
Well, my dating technique, which succeeded with my wife, it was very much of a generation where we chat on MSN Messenger first.
Yeah.
And I've always found it way easier to just talk in general when I get to type it as opposed to speaking it. And just felt very comfortable and open. Just, I can just get it out of the way right now and just have that be part of our first conversation, just saying I have that and explaining it. And she wasn't very ignorant to it. She didn't assume that meant that I swore or spoke obscenities or had any very extreme tics, like some people are very unfortunate to have. But she was just not very fazed by it. She liked me for who I am, in spite of it at the beginning. But now I think she would say that she likes me along with the tics, which is a nice feeling to have.
Yeah, I love that. I'm in that same boat too. That it kind of ends up being something that's kind of, I mean, fun, if that's not too trivial of a word, where if I am having a particularly like ticky day, what she's noticed about me is if I seem particularly engaged in something, then I'll start doing it, and sometimes she'll just kind of look over at me and kind of smile, like, because I won't notice it. Sometimes I'll just do it and I'll just go on a tear, but it's just kind of in the background to me, I guess.
Yeah.
So it's when I'm really engaged by something, and also when I'm really, really stressed. Do you have triggers that you've noticed that seem to cause, flare-ups, so to speak?
I find it hard to determine that, because a lot of the time I like to think that it's just completely random. Because anytime I feel like it's coinciding with something, I worry that I'm just having some kind of confirmation bias and I'm not really reacting to whatever stimuli that is. Sometimes when I don't think I'm doing it, often I am doing it more than I realize.
Right.
Like when I'm interviewing people and I listen to it back and like, wow, I had no idea I was doing it that much. But I don't know if stress makes it happen more or not.
So with that, I mean, that makes me wonder if you have situations where you try to hold it back, or I mean, I know when you're on set, that sort of thing, and you don't want to get your tics on tape, but are you consciously kind of holding back in certain situations? And if so, do you have times where where you find a release?
If I'm recording audio for something, I can kind of focus in, and I kind of do. I can like convert my tics into things which are less noticeable. Like instead of doing a bunch of hard sniffs, in my mind I'll just rationalize it. Well, I'll just do a nice, slow and gentle kind of breathe in through my nose and breathe out, and just do that. And that's basically my way of not having to sniff for 10 minutes or something. And I would usually only do that if we're recording audio for something, or I can't remember any specific situation, but I guess if I'm going to like an important meeting or something, or meeting someone, I would do my best to kind of not show myself doing that like a job interview or something.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I've done that in the past. And as far as, I don't know if there's a big release after the fact or not. Maybe. I haven't noticed going on a big combo or anything after like a period of silence.
So are there other ways that you've tried to manage your tics, or have you tried medications, things like that?
I've never had medication. I've been offered it just when I went to a neurologist for the first time, and he just asked me, it's like, do you feel like this is something which requires medication? And I was just, no, not at all, really. I've always considered, and I've always kind of said I have minor Tourette's, but I have no idea if what I have is minor or the norm or anything, really, because I've never spoken to one other person who has Tourette's other than you. So I just assumed, because I'm not being extreme, and it's not something which is causing me a lot of pain and anguish, but it wasn't something that required any kind of medication. Plus, the side effects for that medication sounded pretty scary when the guy told me about it. He said, I don't know how this is true. I'm sure he said this, but it sounds so wacky. He said that the side effect could be like, it could take your most prevalent tic and make it happen more often and make it painful.
Okay.
And that sounds like a nightmare. So I'm so certain that he said that to me, but it sounds so bizarre that could happen.
Yeah, it sounds so off target.
Yeah, like I would never want that to happen. I would. Yeah. I'm fine. I'm very happy, like sniffing and clearing my throat occasionally versus that.
So this is the first time you've talked to somebody else who has Tourette's? I
went on a date with a girl once who had tics, and she would blink a lot, and it was interesting to be able to talk about it with someone else. But it was just one day with her. We did have other reasons I didn't do anything, but yeah, other than her, no one really I've spoken to, or I don't even really see it anywhere else in the media or read about it elsewhere. It's just very little information, discussion going on anywhere.
If you think there's any takeaway between you and me, or for anybody listening, just anything that you think should be taken from a conversation like this, I mean, what do you think that is? Is there kind of one thing that's been on your mind?
I would say that I've been more open, or tried to commit to being more open about this going forwards. And there's so many things in society, whether it's Tourette's or mental health, or just a number of things which, you make them better by talking about them. And just the reactions I've had to telling people what I have, at the worst, the reactions are unimpressed, which isn't that bad at all. And at the best, people have been responsive and empathetic and interested, and show as if they appreciate knowing you've told them something which you didn't have to tell them, and which is perhaps secret or misunderstood. But each time, for every bad experience I've had interacting with someone regarding my Tourette's, there's 10, 20 good experiences. So I think just my takeaway moving forwards is just don't worry so much about what someone's gonna say or how they're gonna respond to it, and also just to be a little more brave when it comes to taking those opportunities to educate and to be visible, because it's been very easy for my 30 years to be invisible with all this stuff, and to not let people know what's happening, and to not let them know what Tourette syndrome is and what it looks like for me and for a lot of other people who are probably quite similar to me. And it's a lot of missed opportunities I've had to help more people understand what this is. And I think I'm at a stage in my life where I can start trying to make up for that a little bit.
Has it ever crossed your mind to do any documentary work regarding Tourette's?
Maybe not documentary, but certainly writing. Writing an article, either about my experience or about someone else's, is definitely something I would look to do. And I've been invited on a number of podcasts within the little sports bubble I'm in to talk about, things I write about and the sports I'm covering in general. And I turn them down like all the time because I don't want to be sniffing all over their podcast, frankly. And it's either that or I have this awkward explainer at the beginning where I'm saying, like, oh, before we get this started, just so your audience knows, I have Tourette's, so they were going to hear me sniffing, they're going to hear me clearing my throat, but it is what it is, man. And I think I need to be less of a baby about being afraid of how awkward that could be, and just, put myself out there more and accept those invitations more often, and kind of relish more in giving the explainer as opposed to being so fearful of it.
Well, for what it's worth, I mean, I haven't really been able to pick up much in my headphones from your end, so I don't know if it just kind of works itself out over the phone line or not. But
it's good for the podcast, I guess. I'm not stepping on your lines, but yeah, if I was doing it, I think I need to be fine if I'm doing it and fine if I'm not doing it. I could tell you a bad experience when someone learned about my Tourette's. It was I don't know if I've mentioned this. It's also kind of embarrassing, but the world I work in, like, I write about combat sports for a living, primarily mixed martial arts and the UFC. I write for a website called Bloody Elbow, which has a pretty brutal name, but we're kind of known as the social justice warriors of this space. So I get invited on a lot of podcasts to talk about MMA and talk about like fight sports and things like that. Yeah. And one guy messaged me like somewhat recently after I wrote a big article asking if I'd come on his podcast. And this year, I consider this year being the year where I'm going to say yes to everything, just to kind of get out of my comfort zone more. So he sent me that message. Yeah, I'm like, okay, yes, I will be on your podcast, but just so you know, I have Tourette's, which means in the purpose of your podcast, you're going to hear me sniffing and clearing my throat. If that's, too like weird for you, and it's fine, I just thought I'd let you know. And his response was rather disappointing. I actually have it right here. I'm going to read it.
Yeah, please.
So I told him that, and he says, I can edit it out. How frequent? Mid-sentence? And I said, like, frequency varies all the time. Sometimes it doesn't happen. Sometimes you'll hear nothing but that. And I said I can give a disclaimer telling your audience what it is, just so we know what it is, and like it's not so strange. And then he says, if you're fine with a disclaimer, I'm good with it. And I also explained that what I have is I don't curse and swear a lot, because that's actually very rare for people who have Tourette. So that's not what I'm going to be doing. And he said, I was kind of half hoping for the swearing kind, smiley face. And then what's your availability? So yes, that never happened. My Tourette's is cool if it can be a joke for him, and that was very disappointing.
Yeah, I mean, do you think he was maybe kind of nervous about it and was hoping that the playfulness would maybe kind of pay off in some sort of ironic way, or I don't know? It's just
the dressings of his podcast and him as a character and persona seemed to have a very kind of like shock jock and Morning Zoo kind of vibe about it. So I kind of assumed the worst. And felt like he did literally think it would be a riot if he was talking to me and I was interrupting my thoughts and what I wanted to say by things which were involuntary. But that's really the only negative thing that's ever happened to me when telling someone I have Tourette's.
Yeah, and I guess that's probably somebody who disappoints people on a routine basis too. Yeah. If that's the maturity level, so I'd say your track record is pretty good.
Yeah. But I did make a point when that happened. I kind of made a decision in my mind to like try and get on more kind of things where my voice would be heard and my tics would be heard. And it's around that time where I saw you were bringing this podcast on. I believe you followed me on Twitter, and I saw that. I'm like, oh, that's cool. That's the kind of thing which I said I would do. And then I needed to psych myself up a little bit, but eventually I messaged you.
Yeah, and I really appreciate it, because I mean, it means a lot to, again, like we were saying before, just finding somebody else who has some of the similar sort of maybe less likely kinds of tics that I do. But also just kind of hearing about how you've basically kind of gone about it the same way I have, where I've just chose to manage it in private, just like you said, I mean, this was kind of like a 2018 sort of thing for me, starting this podcast and trying to get more comfortable and starting off by talking to other people who have it. And then hopefully it'll be no thing for me to kind of work it into my public life or social life or however you want to put it. But, just talking to people like you was a big part of that for me.
Well, and I'm happy you're doing it, because for me too, just talking to somebody else someone who has the same tic is pretty wild. That's pretty fun to like hear someone say that they do that thing which you thought was just so weird and like strange where you're doing it, and there's no one else on the planet who possibly does that too, because it's just such a strange movement and idea behind it. So that's pretty cool. And just in general, I'm really looking forward to just hearing other people's stories for this, because like I have no idea what other people go through with this, and I'd like to know. And it's just it's hard to find other people who have this and who do these things. So it's really neat that you're bringing a lot of us together and sharing our stories, and not only with the people who will appear on your podcast, but just people listening in general. And it'll be fun to see the feedback and to actually have a community. It's fun to be a part of this first group you speak to, but I hope there are many more, and we get to hear a lot of stories from lots of other people in all different walks of life and all different places. I'm excited to hear what everyone else has to say.
I mean, Tim, I appreciate this. This has been great.
Well, thank you. It was fun. I enjoyed. I do have one more anecdote I can throw in.
Yeah. Let's hear it.
I can throw my wife under the bus slightly. I'll say there's only one like one time where my wife will actually bring up my Tourette's or kind of complain about it, and it's first thing in the morning, because I wake up like really early in the morning, often before her, and I'll go on my phone and I'll be in bed, and I don't know it, but I'm sniffing and clearing my throat, and I wake her up. So I often hear like her stirring, and just her letting me know like, you're sniffing. And that's the only negative impact it has on my marriage. Other than that, we're good. My wife, she's very sweet about it when she does bring it up, because it's more of a sigh kind of thing as opposed to any anger whatsoever. She's a teacher. That'll be up early and see a bunch of kids, and I'm waking her up earlier than she needs to be, so I get it. It's when we laugh off. And the only other time where it is any annoyance to her, which I guess I should take the full blame for this, is every now and then, like we'll hug, and I'll need to do a really huge sniff tic, like a really big one. And I do it. Of course, her ear is right there by my nose. Right. I'm like blasting her in the ear with this incredibly loud tic, and she'll reel back like, ah. But it's more funny than it is anything else. Obviously I don't do it on purpose, and she knows that.
Right.
This is another thing we laugh about. It's wild that you have that, but you do that, the armpit shoulder thing. It's crazy. That's funny.
Yeah. And it's kind of funny too, because if I start thinking about my tics or tics that I don't have anymore that I used to have, that they're going to kind of come back to haunt me and kind of, remanifest. And which does happen. If I start talking about my old tics, or, if my fiance asks me about like what happened to that one tic that you haven't done in a while, I'll start doing it again, because it's on my mind. Like, it's just my brain has reclaimed it, and I'll do it. And since we've been talking, I've been doing that armpit thing, and it doesn't bother me. It's just something I've been doing kind of like in background mode, so to speak.
Well, I think it's comforting too. A lot of tics I find comforting. So a lot of them doesn't feel bad when I'm doing them. But as far as things coming and going, I definitely have that experience too. And a lot of my ones which come and go are more so these muscular ones, or what I call muscular, these like tensing muscles or body parts, or doing like stretches and things like that. Those are the ones I find. Like sometimes I'll have like a flavor of the month, and it'll be one of those turns up, and it's like, I got to do a bunch of those kind of thing. I can remember one which I used to have, which I don't do anymore, would be like tensing my jaw, and like making it really tight between like my collarbone and my jaw and my neck, and just like really like stiffening that for some reason. That's one which I haven't done for a while, but I remember it's one which came and went. Just a lot of those weird straining muscle ones or things which happen.
Yeah, I have a lot of those too. A lot of the similar. There's one I do with my neck where Maybe I should look at like an anatomy chart so I can better identify which muscle it is, but I'll kind of stretch this muscle on the side of my neck by kind of like flexing my jaw in a certain way between my shoulder and my jaw. And then the back of my neck, this one actually drives me crazy because this one's a little bit painful, but I'll kind of tense up the muscles in the back of my neck and kind of stiffen my neck that way. And if I'm really on a roll and I'm doing it, on repeat, it starts to give me a headache. It really kind of wears pretty quickly. But that one I haven't really experienced too much lately. It's mostly I'll have some weird breathing tics. I'll have some stomach tics where I tense my stomach muscles. I'll tense my arm muscles quite a bit. I'll have some sort of like inner mouth kind of tics, like not to where I'm vibrating my vocal cords, but maybe I'm just kind of like making a clicking or a clucking kind of thing inside my mouth or moving my tongue a certain way. The eyes is one. I'll kind of open my eyes wide, and that's actually one my fiance likes for some reason. Then let's see what else. I have I'll tense my jaw muscles sometimes, and then I have vocal tics where I'll just kind of make these like almost like a and I'll just do that on repeat, maybe 10 to 15 times, and then I'm good for a little bit. Another one where it kind of sounds like I'm saying and I mainly do that. I've noticed when I'm driving to work. I have a 30-minute commute to work, which is a really good release zone for me. I tic all the way home and all the way to work when I'm in my car. But those vocal tics, that's where they really start to fly, is when I'm driving.
I've never had anything where it's any kind of like mouthing of a word or any kind of like recognizable sound like that.
Right. Yeah.
I can't even imagine having one like that.
Yeah. They're strange because they come and go and they kind of evolve and they take different forms and sometimes but there is that satisfaction element to it where this one tic where I try to hit the lowest note sort of that my voice can do, like just kind of like a gravelly kind of sound, and I have to do it a perfect way for me to feel satisfied. And it's really weird because when I do it, there's a visual element to it as well. So I kind of picture like a broken up line, and the broken up line is kind of like an illustration of what I think this gravelly sound looks like if it was to be like mapped out or something by some instrument or something like that. And if I do it perfectly, that line looks perfect. And if not, I have to keep going at it until I get it right.
Well, I was about to tell you as well that I was about to say, like, this is the weirdest thing ever, but do you ever have like an image in your mind when you're trying to do these tics? Because I have one like that too. It's like it's a tensing of like my chest muscle up really high in my left shoulder. And it's like, I'm imagining as if like, if I did it the perfect way, it's almost like a piece like of like a metal drawer almost will like pull out of my chest and then flip and go back in.
Huh.
Like it's kind of like the image in my head, like almost like a cup holder you bring out and push back in. I'm imagining that if I do that tic perfectly with my chest muscle, it's almost like I see that happening, something coming out and like rearranging and going back in again.
Yeah, that's man. So there's I've never really, I guess, thought about this in a speaking aloud kind of way until right now. But my family used to vacation at a beach about, it was about an hour from where I grew up. But just in the summer times, we would go to my uncle's beach house down there, and I remember seeing this piece of driftwood. It's like the sun bleached piece of driftwood on the beach, and the way it was shaped, I felt like I think of that piece of driftwood because it kind of had this like kind of pulled. It almost looked like a piece of chewing gum that had been like kind of pulled, and that's what I picture when I do certain muscle stretches. I feel like my muscles are kind of taking that shape, and I picture that almost every single time.
Yeah, that's wild.
It's so bizarre that there has to be that sort of component to it.
I have a clear image in my head. I don't know if it's something I've ever seen, and like for sure, but the thing coming in and out, it's almost like it's like when I was young in a bus, like a school bus kind of thing, and we'd go on where I lived. They were like coaches, which would take you to and from, but they were just regular kind of buses people would travel on. They weren't specific school buses. And back in like the 90s, early 2000s, these things had ashtrays on them, right? You could pull an ashtray out the seat in front of you, and it would be like metal looking at it. It's kind of like some reason pulling that in and out is like kind of something I have in my head when I do a lot of the really hard tensing of muscles, especially the ones around my chest and shoulder. But hearing you say like your image is definitely something you'd seen before and you're remembering, I'm wondering now if that's something I actually did see, and as I see it, it's the same image I actually saw in real life, or if it is just a approximation and an amalgamation of what I assume that thing looks like.
I'm going to have to start asking other people about this, because this is the first time I've talked about this, maybe ever.
Yeah, me too.
I think I remember talking with somebody else on the podcast about music, someone else who's interested in music, and when I think of certain chords or certain sounds, I'll, there'll be a visual element to it, or I'll think of there could be a visual representation of what a certain kind of guitar chord sounds like to me, or what it looks like to me if it took some sort of visual form, or if it was mapped up like on a graph or something. But I mean, as far as like the actual Tics producing a visual, this is the first time I've ever talked about this.
Yeah, and maybe more than a visual, maybe a memory. And, it's
odd. I mean, this is really cool stuff to talk about.
Yeah. Good job we have a podcast for it.
Thanks for listening. Loved this episode. Just the discovery that comes when you talk to people who go through the same rare thing as you. Speaking of which, it's especially important for kids who've been diagnosed with Tourette Syndrome to have that kind of connection point, just something to feel less isolated. Well, for Tourette Awareness Month, huge thanks to Angie for sending me this. On her blog, she posted a classroom presentation that she and her son did on how to explain Tourette's to school children. It's really brilliant, a very smart way of explaining it. Let me just read the first few sentences. Quote, "I want everybody to not blink." Now, as I talk about blinking, does it become easier or harder? It becomes harder, doesn't it? Can you stop blinking? Why do we have to blink? Blinking is helpful, and our brains tell us to blink for good reasons. But some people's brains send signals to do extra things for no reason. These are called tics. End quote. And I'll post the link in the show notes to this presentation so you can find it, so you can copy it. You can adapt it. I get a lot of emails from parents asking for resources when it comes to, grade school kids and how they negotiate TS at that really sensitive and complicated age. What a great project for Awareness Month. Thank you, Angie, and thank you, David. Again, I'll post that presentation in the show notes with this episode at tourettespodcast.libsyn.com. Okay, so the work will begin soon for Season 2 of the Tourette's Podcast. Here's the game plan. I'm going to take a little bit of time to catch up on things I need to catch up on, and then I'll be scheduling interviews. A lot of you have reached out about that. If you've emailed me and haven't received a reply, you'll get one. I promise. I'm really excited about the interest, and I can't wait to talk to more of you and hear your ideas and stories. It's going to be great. Email me at tourettespodcast@gmail.com if you'd like to do an interview. And if you're thinking, I like the idea, but I'm not good enough for an interview, I'll just tell you that's nonsense. Please email me. I would love to talk to you. Season 1 of this podcast is done. Could not be happier. Please keep the conversation going. Find me on Twitter with the handle @Tourette'sPod. Please consider leaving a friendly review on iTunes if you've enjoyed the podcast. I want it to grow. I definitely want it to reach more people, and send along your ideas to help in that regard. We'll keep talking in the meantime. Thanks again. This is Ben.